This is the Conscious Hour, part two. Now you get to hear some lies. Listen to the ex-CIA director.
But not everybody agrees with you and me on that. Chris, you have this clip?
So I think you could see on Putin's face, he felt very, very comfortable. And the fact that he was given a ride then in the presidential limousine, the Beast, I certainly hope the Secret Service has swept that vehicle very well in terms of any type of, small microchip that might have been put in the vehicle. But then in the press conference, Putin looked
instilling fear. Ooh, they're spying on us.
Agree that he looked chipper and upbeat. I can't imagine that while he's sitting there in the presence of the president and whoever else was back there, and if you've ever seen it, it's huge. You could almost play billiards back there. I'm exaggerating a little. That he would plant some sort of a microchip.
The fact that this idea comes from the former head of the CIA, John Brennan, tells us so much about the intelligence of our so-called intelligence community. And it also helps explain why there's been such a mess in Ukraine. When the coup happened in 2014 in Ukraine, which kicked off this whole mess, who was the head of the CIA was John Brennan. And who did the new Ukrainian military intelligence chief immediately call upon taking up their position after the coup? They called the CIA. And we know from the New York Times, that article that came out earlier this year, that the CIA then basically took over Ukraine's intelligence service and built 10 new bases inside of Ukraine. We also know that in 2016, when John Brennan was pushing the Russiagate hoax to frame Trump as a Russian agent and to accuse Russia falsely of launching a massive interference campaign to put him in office, Brennan used Ukrainian intelligence to make his allegations. And so the fact that Brennan can now go on MSNBC and speculate that Putin dropped a microchip in Trump's vehicle and for that to be taken seriously, it speaks to why we're in the mess we're in. By the way, there was a major revelation in Russiagate last week. I'll just mention it briefly because it's very important. The heart of Russiagate was the allegation that Russia hacked Democratic Party emails and gave them to WikiLeaks. 7 years ago, when Trump and Putin had their first summit in Helsinki, right before the summit, Robert Mueller dropped his indictment of alleged Russian intelligence officers for allegedly hacking and leaking the emails. And this was a huge thing, and already the Russiagate thing was casting a shadow over Trump. But now, with that indictment, it just basically defined the entire weekend. And when Trump stood next to Putin and said actually he believed Putin's denial of interfering in the election, there was a meltdown. John Brennan called him a traitor. John Brennan said that Trump was nothing short of treasonous, okay? So fast forward 7 years later, and what did we get last week? More evidence that this allegation that Russia hacked and leaked these emails was a complete U.S. intelligence fabrication. Because what did we get last week? Tulsi Gabbard declassified an email exchange between Mike Rogers, the then head of the National Security Agency. In December 2016, he wrote to John Brennan, James Clapper, and Jim Comey, just as they were putting the final touches on this intelligence report that was going to accuse Russia of a massive influence plot right before Trump took office in January 2017. And Mike Rogers said, hey guys, my guys at the NSA, we're being shut out of the intelligence process. You're not letting us review the underlying intelligence that you're using to blame Russia for hacking and leaking the DNC. And if you're going to keep doing this, we can't put our name on this report. And what does James Clapper say in response? He says, sorry, we can only give you so much and we can't compromise on time. We have to compromise our normal modalities. And then he said, we all have to be in the same page, in the spirit of it's our story and we're sticking to it.
No,
Clapper actually wrote that. So Clapper was acknowledging that he was involved in a fraud.
Story.
And they got
every one of your...
See how they play it? CIA, Mossad, they're the puppet masters. And the puppets are politicians. And we can get out of this mess because we have one opportunity right now to give the agreement for Russia and Ukraine to establish a neutrality forever. Russia's already defined what they want. Ukraine has no say. Basically, they're taking back the land that they actually were all Russian anyways, and a little bit more. But the rest of it, Putin didn't want it. Remember, they're always saying that the Russians are coming to get us? Okay, I was born in 52. And in 57, I went to kindergarten and I had to pledge allegiance to the flag. I came home. My mom said, "How was school?" I said, "It was fine." She goes, "What's wrong, Greg?" I said, "I don't like to pledge allegiance." She goes, "Why?" It's bombs bursting in air. It's real creepy. And then later, we had air raid sirens and we had to get underneath the desk because the Russians were coming to get us. And I knew that was a lie. When I was 6 years old, I knew it was a lie. I knew it was a lie when I was 7 years old. In fact, I challenged my teacher. Somebody says, "You did what?" I was so tired of getting underneath my desk for 3 years. When the air raid sirens went off, I was underneath my desk. I was laughing. And my girlfriend, Marlene Lowry, from Canada, man, I remember that name from kindergarten or third grade. And my teacher was Mrs. Curie. And Mrs. Curie said, "Greg, what are you laughing about? Stand up." So I stood up and I looked right at her and she goes, Gregory. I said, I don't believe the Russians are going to bomb us. They are, or no, I said, the Russians aren't our enemy. They aren't going to bomb us. And she looked at me and she said, "What'd you say?" And I said, "The Russians are an enemy." And I explained that the Russians were ally in World War I and World War II. And Romanov gave $300 million to the North to fight the fascists in the South during the Civil War. Hello, Russia wasn't our enemy. And so by third grade, I was done. There was no way I was going to get underneath another desk because I knew it was bullshit. So look where we are today, folks. The same bullshit, the same military industrial complex. Fuck you. You need to die. And I don't mean dead like in a grave. You just need to get the fuck out of our way so we can build a world where everybody comes together. We don't need this old megalopolis machine called the MIC, the Zionist and the whack jobs that don't call themselves Zionists. They just like to kill and make lots of money. And to all those money grubbers out there, let me ask you a question, Klaus Schwab. Will you ever be able to spend the money you've made in your life? No. Elon, no. Take any of the billionaires or multimillionaires. They'll never be able to get rid of their money unless they just buy more shit. There's a whole new world order. We can shift so quickly and it will be simple. Everybody wins. This is the Conscious Hour. If you're interested in that, let me know.